She arrived with nothing but a cast-iron pot and a voice barely louder than the wind. And what followed changed not just one man, but an entire home. What if the most powerful kind of love isn't found in words, but in bread rising quietly at dawn? Stay with us, because this story might just be the one that makes you believe in home again, where firelight silence and second chances redefine everything. Arizona Territory, late summer of 1879. The day was fading fast over Canyon Ridge, the horizon bleeding with hues of crimson and gold. The sun, once blazing and defiant, now slipped behind the tall mesas, as if retreating from something it could not warm. It had been one of those long, dry days where even the wind forgot how to breathe, and the land lay still tired from holding its own weight. Jonas Calloway leaned against a post on the porch of his aging ranch house, a rag hanging loose in his hand, his sleeves stained with axle grease. He wasn't fixing the wagon because it needed it. Truth was, he just needed something to do with his hands so his thoughts wouldn't get too loud. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 5 days. Hadn't had reason to. The chickens clucked out of habit. The horses didn't ask questions, and the wind, when it came, only whispered names he didn't care to hear. That evening, he was just about to go back inside when it happened. Not thunder, not the lowing of cattle. A knock, 3 of them. Soft, intentional, right on the wooden frame of the screen door. Jonas froze. Out here, no one came knocking unless something was wrong or about to be. He turned his head slowly. A shadow moved just beyond the reach of the last golden rays. As the shape came into view, he saw her. A girl, no, a young woman. Maybe 19, maybe not even that. She stood still as stone wrapped in a threadbare shawl that flapped gently in the breeze. Her dress was torn at the hem and coated in red dust. Her boots were cracked and near-broken soles flapping slightly with each step she'd taken to get here. And in her arms she held a cast-iron pot, cradled it like it was a child. Her face was sunburned, lips dry and cracked, but her eyes were wide and steady, like they'd seen more than anyone her age should. "I don't talk much, mister," she said. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but carried with it something unshakable. "But I can cook." That was it. No crying, no explanation, no plea for help, just a declaration and a promise. Jonas looked at her. Really looked. He took in her blistered hands, how tightly she clung to that pot, how her knees shook but didn't buckle. She stood like someone who had walked too far and lost too much to beg. Whatever she carried in that pot, it wasn't just for show. It was memory. It was defiance. It was survival. He didn't speak right away. He just asked, "Name." "Willa Hart," she said. She didn't hesitate. "Where's your family?" She shook her head. "Gone. Just me now. And this." She gave the pot a small lift, as if to show it wasn't much, but it was hers. Jonas looked past her down the long trail that disappeared into the dusk. No wagon, no mule, no bags, just footprints and determination. 100 things he could have said rose up in his throat, none of them found air. Instead, he stepped back from the doorway and gestured with a quiet nod. "Then come in," he said, his voice thick. "You're hired, and you're home." Willa didn't move at first. Her eyes flicked from his face to the open doorway and back. When she did step forward, it was slow, like someone afraid the floorboards might vanish beneath her feet. She crossed the threshold, her footsteps silent against the wood, like a ghost learning to trust the living. Inside, the ranch house was cold. Clean, but empty. Shadows lay in corners where light had long stopped reaching. The walls held a quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of rooms that had forgotten laughter. Jonas pointed down the hall. "There's a cot in the back. Sheets are clean. Water's in the basin. We'll talk chores tomorrow. Tonight you eat." She nodded once. No smile. No more words. She disappeared into the back room, the sound of her steps swallowed by the quiet house. Jonas stood there for a long time. Outside, the last light drained from the sky, replaced by a deep indigo hush. The barn groaned softly in the breeze. From the chicken coop came a muffled rustle. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried out. Then silence fell like a curtain. He stepped back onto the porch, the wooden boards cool beneath his feet. His hand rested against the doorframe as he stared out into the open land. The kind of land that didn't forget. He should have locked the door, he always did. Habit made from grief, but this time he didn't. He pulled it shut gently, the latch sliding into place without a sound. And he left it unlocked, because sometimes the world breaks a person in quiet ways. It chips at their voice until only actions remain. And sometimes, if you're lucky, what knocks on your door isn't trouble or tragedy. Sometimes it's someone holding a pot and asking, not for pity, but for purpose. And when that kind of knock comes, you don't answer with questions. You make room at the table. You make room for the fire to start again. Before the dawn could even stretch across the horizon, Willa Hart stirred beneath a woolen quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and years gone by. It was the first time in weeks, maybe months, that she had slept under a roof not borrowed in fear. Her body was sore, not from strain, but from relief. For the first time in far too long, she hadn't curled in the dark with one hand on her pot and the other over her heart. She had simply rested. The boards creaked beneath her bare feet as she rose, brushing her hair back with one hand and breathing in the unfamiliar safety that wrapped the house like a shawl. She washed her face with water gone cold in the basin, then quietly stepped out into the hallway. The ranch house, though aged and sun-worn, felt sacred somehow, like each corner held a memory that refused to be spoken aloud. The kitchen greeted her with silence. A silence so deep it echoed. She stood in the doorway and looked around. Cobwebs clung to beams like forgotten lace. The stove wore a coat of ash that hadn't been disturbed in years. Pans hung on hooks, rusted and tired. The whole space felt like someone had stopped loving it long ago. But beneath the grime, Willa saw more. She saw the edges of a life once lived, once cherished. There were scars in the cutting board, hand-whittled. A chipped blue bowl tucked behind the flour tin. A jar of honey sealed tight. This had been someone's kitchen, someone who knew how to make a house feel like home. So, she got to work. She lit the stove the way her father once had, coaxing the fire to life with dry twigs and breath. The kettle moaned as it heated, steam rising like a ghost finding its way home. She filled a bucket from the well and scrubbed every surface she could reach. Counters, cabinets, floorboards. Her hands ached, but her spirit did not. She didn't hum, but the rhythm of the work felt like a lullaby just the same. She opened the shutters one by one, letting the morning light pour in. She washed every dish she could find, polished, tarnished utensils, swept out nests of dust from forgotten corners. She sorted through a tin of dried herbs, checking each one for scent and freshness. Some were no good, but some still held fragrance. She smiled faintly at a sprig of rosemary still strong, despite the years. She found an apron stuffed in the back of a drawer, worn thin, but still intact. She put it on, tied it tight, and rolled up her sleeves. Her hair came up in a knot held by an old wooden pin. It was not about appearances. It was about purpose. Outside, Jonas watched through the kitchen window. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He simply stood with his arms crossed and something strange in his chest, like maybe a page was turning. When Willa cracked the eggs he'd left on the porch bench and chopped the onions from the garden, the scent drifted like a hymn through the house. Jonas stepped inside, then quiet as a shadow. "You used the time," he said. Willa nodded. "Still smelled good." Clara liked thyme in her eggs, he said softer. Willa looked up, met his eyes. Then I'll keep using it. They ate in silence, but not the kind that hurts. It was a silence that listened, that noticed. She made cornbread too dense, golden, with a crust that cracked just right. When Jonas bit into it, his eyes closed. Not because of hunger, but because of memory. "You cook like you carry something," he said. "I do," she replied, "but not all of it is heavy." After the meal, Willa tidied the kitchen again. She found a tin of old seeds labeled herbs and tucked it aside. Maybe later, maybe soon. As the morning stretched into day, she did not ask for instructions. She found a broom and swept the porch, carried firewood inside, checked on the chickens. She worked with the rhythm of someone who had done it all before, and found peace in it. The next morning, Willa found the table newly sanded, smooth, clean, like it was waiting for dough. And beside it lay a rolling pin, oak carved by hand, the kind that fits your palm without needing to ask. She didn't need to ask who made it. She ran her fingers over the wood, and for a moment everything she'd lost, her parents, her bakery, her safety, felt just a little less gone. Jonas didn't mention it, but that night he fixed the loose cabinet hinge in the pantry. That week, she reorganized every shelf. She hung a curtain in the kitchen window, patched one of the aprons, found an old cloth napkin with initials embroidered on the edge, CL. She folded it and placed it gently in the top drawer. The house began to breathe again, and the kitchen, that long, quiet heart of the ranch, remembered what it was to be alive. By the time the sun was high enough to warm the western windows, the ranch house had begun to hum again, not loudly, not in any obvious way, but like a whisper remembered after years of forgetting. And at the center of that whisper was the kitchen. The fire that Willa Hart had rekindled now burned daily, not just for cooking, but as an offering to warmth, to time, to whatever, or whoever, still listened in this house. It started with small things. A song hummed under her breath as she kneaded bread dough. A flower picked from the roadside tucked into a jar near the windowsill. She never forced the silence out, just softened its edges. Jonas noticed. He didn't say so, but the way he lingered longer in the doorway, the way he started washing his own plate at the basin, those were his words. The kitchen, for all its rust and quiet history, had started to live again. Not just in scent and sizzle, but in spirit. Willa moved with familiarity, not from habit, but from memory, and with it came something deeper than routine reverence. Every slice of onion was deliberate, every dusting of flour respectful, as if she were honoring not just the food, but the space itself. One chilly morning, after Jonas had returned from checking the fence line, he stepped into a room transformed. The table had a cloth on it, plain but clean. A tin of biscuits sat waiting still warm, and on the wall something new, or perhaps old rediscovered. A child's drawing, browned with age, pinned with care. He stopped short, studying it. Found it in the drawer with the spoons, Willa said without turning. Didn't seem right to leave it buried. Jonas said nothing. But later that day, Willa found a new chair brought in from the shed, sanded, repaired, set at the end of the table. Children began to come. At first, it was the two girls from the ranch over the ridge sent with eggs as trade. Willa showed them how to knead, without tearing the dough, how to roll evenly. They giggled at the mess the flour on their noses, and when Jonas brought in a basket of fresh apples, Willa set them to slicing for pie. "We'll bake one for each of us," she said. "One to eat, one to share, and one just to smell up the house." Jonas chuckled at that, a sound that startled them all, including himself. "Didn't think you knew how," Willa teased not unkindly. He tipped his hat. "Surprises come cheap in old age." Willa watched the way he bent toward the girls, showed them how to peel with the grain. He was not a loud man, but gentle in instruction, and the children listened. Reed Dalton arrived on a Thursday. The sound of his boots on the path was wrong. Too sure, too smooth. Willa was folding towels on the porch railing when he stepped into view. Time stopped, or maybe just slowed enough for her heart to hear its own warning. "Well now," he drawled. "Ain't you a surprise?" He hadn't changed, still carried himself like charm was a weapon. His smile never touched his eyes. "Just passing through," he said, letting his eyes travel places they shouldn't. "Thought I smelled cornbread. Didn't expect to find you running a kitchen." Willa stood taller. "It's not mine. I just cook here." "That right?" He stepped closer. Shame to see such fine hands wasted on chores. Before she could reply, bootsteps sounded behind her. Jonas had come from the side path, a sack of feed in one arm. He took one look, dropped the sack, and stepped beside her. "She cooks here. Lives here. That's all you need to know." Reed's grin faltered. "Didn't mean trouble, just memories." Jonas didn't blink. "Then keep walking." Reed nodded slowly, almost in mockery. Tipped his hat to Willa. "Ma'am." He left dust behind and something darker. Willa stood still, hands clenched. Jonas didn't speak. He didn't touch her, didn't rush. Just waited. "Thank you," she whispered, voice brittle. "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "A good cook deserves a safe kitchen." Later that night, Willa washed the same plate 3 times. She kept her back to the door even when Jonas came in. He didn't ask what Reed had meant to her. He only picked up a dish towel and dried beside her. Wordless, steady. The next morning, a horseshoe hung over the back door. Old iron bent with time but firm. "To keep what matters safe," he muttered, passing her with a cup of coffee. Willa stood in the doorway long after he'd gone outside, her hand resting on the cool metal curve. For the first time in her life, protection hadn't come at a cost. It had come quietly, freely. She turned, looked around the kitchen, and felt her breath catch. Not from fear, from something close to peace. That afternoon she baked 2 pies, one for supper, one to leave cooling on the sill just in case the wind might carry its scent toward anyone needing a place where the door didn't lock, where the flour was fresh, and the fire always stayed lit. The first signs of spring crept slowly across the canyon ridge. They did not come with grand gestures, no burst of blossoms or sudden warmth, but with subtler cues, a softening wind, a greener hue to the grass, the faint scent of earth waking from its long sleep. But for Willa Hart, the most profound sign came not from the land, but from within the house. From the kitchen, she was kneading dough on the table Jonas had smoothed just for her, the same table where they now ate together each evening, speaking little, but sharing much. Her hands moved with purpose, her rhythm steady. The kitchen smelled of yeast and rosemary, of bread about to rise, and the quiet hope of ordinary things. And then there was the knock, not on the door, but from life itself. A woman from town, all satin and perfume and polite curiosity, arrived in a buggy, pulled by 2 sleek horses. She introduced herself as Mrs. Brenshaw, the mayor's wife from Flagstaff, and she had come on the wind of gossip and cobbler. Word had reached her about the girl out on the ridge who baked pies that tasted like memory. Jonas wasn't home when she came. Willa invited her in, offered coffee and peach preserves. Mrs. Brenshaw ate slowly, eyes narrowed, thoughtful. "You could own a bakery, you know," she said, wiping the corner of her mouth. "We have a small storefront, Stoveworks. Customers every day. You'd have your name painted right above the window." Willa said nothing at first. Her eyes flicked to the stove, the wood-burning one she'd coaxed back to life with ash and effort. To the apron Jonas had stitched a patch into, to the horseshoe still firm above the back door. "I'll think about it," she replied softly. That night, she baked a loaf of sourdough with a crust so golden it shone like the desert at high noon. She didn't tell Jonas about the offer, not yet. Instead, she placed the bread between them at supper and watched as he tore a piece free. He chewed, nodded once, and said, "Smells like mornings should." The next day, Willa walked to the ridge before sunrise. She stood there, clutching a letter from Flagstaff and looking out at the land. The wind tangled in her hair. She imagined her name on a sign, customers smiling, a stove that never needed coaxing. She imagined success, respect, stability. She imagined being known, and yet she thought about the way Jonas always left a jar of jam on the table before she woke, the way he never asked questions when she was quiet, the way he'd carved that rolling pin just for her hands. She remembered the moment Reed Dalton had tried to step back into her life and how Jonas had stepped forward. She turned around, went home, said nothing. 3 days later, she packed a small bag. She didn't tell Jonas where she was going, just said she needed to see something through. He didn't ask, just helped her load the borrowed mule and watched her go, his eyes following until she vanished down the road. Willa made it all the way to town, stood outside the little bakery with its spotless window. The woman inside waved at her, gestured for her to come in, and Willa almost did. But then she saw a boy walk by, holding his mother's hand, a crust of bread in the other, laughing. It was the kind of laugh that sounded like home, and Willa's heart cracked, not in pain, but in understanding. She rode back that same night. The stars were already overhead when she tied up the mule. The house was dark. She stepped onto the porch, clutching a fresh loaf beneath one arm and her heart in the other. The door creaked. Jonas was sitting at the table, a lantern burning low beside him. "I didn't go in," she said simply. He looked up, eyes steady. "Didn't expect you to." She stepped forward, placed the loaf on the table. "Unless you're planning to fire me," she added, voice trembling slightly. Jonas stood, reached into his pocket, drew out a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it, slowly, carefully, and inside was a silver ring, scuffed by time, but whole. He placed it on the table beside the bread. "Then you're not just hired," he said, his voice low. "You're home." Willa blinked hard, nodded, and reached for the ring. Her fingers, dusted with flour, closed around it like it was the final missing piece of something she hadn't dared believe in. "I hope you like biscuits every day," she whispered. Jonas smiled faintly. "As long as they come with you." The lamp flickered. Outside, the wind settled. Inside, the kitchen glowed. It wasn't the promise of town that made Willa stay, it was the bread between them. The kind that wasn't bought or sold, but offered and shared. The kind that rose not from flour and yeast, but from trust. That night, they sat by the fire with 2 mugs of coffee and no need for words. The ring fit her hand like it had always been waiting. And the bread, still warm, was torn and passed back and forth, bite by bite, until it was gone. No one noticed exactly when the kitchen began to hum again. It didn't start with laughter or music or clattering pans. It began with something quieter, the low whistle of a kettle on the stove, the dull thud of boots at the door, the flicker of firelight dancing over old shelves. But over time, the house itself seemed to exhale as if it had held its breath for years, and finally dared to breathe again. Willa Hart woke each morning before the sun climbed over Canyon Ridge, her fingers already twitching for flour and kindling. She no longer needed to whisper herself into action. This was her place now, and each sound she made was part of the house's rhythm. The kitchen, once forgotten and gray, now lived in a daily ritual of warmth. Biscuits rose like prayers in the oven. Pies cooled in the window. Bread dough puffed in cloth-covered bowls like sleeping kittens. There were no grand gestures, no celebrations, just meals, conversations, life. She taught children from nearby ranches to bake on Saturdays. They came with dusty boots and curious eyes clutching eggs or apples in trade. She taught them to wash their hands properly, to knead gently, to let the dough rest like a secret waiting to unfold. Jonas sometimes watched from the doorway, arms crossed, but his eyes soft. The laughter of those children, the way they called her Miss Willa, brought something back to him he hadn't realized he missed. One day, Willa caught him planting rosemary in a box near the porch. She didn't say anything, just brought him a cool drink and watched as he worked his hands steady, the same hands that had once built fences, wrangled cattle, now coaxing herbs from dry earth. The ranch was not what it once was, but it was something. Something more. By mid-spring, Jonas had repaired the barn roof, built a new chicken coop, and fashioned a small greenhouse from old window panes. Willa filled it with thyme-sage lavender and a few tomato vines that tried their best. Each evening, they sat on the porch as the sky turned the color of coal, smudged with peach. Sometimes they spoke of simple things, the weather, the price of salt, whether or not the cow was pregnant. But often they didn't need words. The space between them was full enough. Then, one morning, a letter arrived from Willa's cousin in Texas, a relative she barely remembered but who had found her name through church records and wanted to reconnect. There was an invitation, come visit, see what became of the rest of the family. It was gentle kind, but as she read the words aloud at the breakfast table, her voice wavered. Jonas looked at her and said simply, "You should go if you need to." She shook her head. "I've done too much leaving." He said nothing more, just passed her the jam. That night she baked something new, a cake her mother used to make, cinnamon and brown sugar layered in folds. As it rose, the scent filled the house, drawing Jonas in from the porch. "That smell," he said. "I could follow it across a canyon?" She laughed, the kind of laugh that came from deep down, and something caught in his throat. Later, she found him in the workshop, carving another handle, this one smaller, delicate. A scoop for flour. He didn't offer it, just left it on the kitchen counter with a folded cloth beneath it. Willa understood. These weren't gifts, they were vows made in silence. A week later, a boy from town arrived with a bundle of letters for Jonas and a shy question for Willa. His mother had asked if Willa would consider making extra loaves to sell in town. Not a shop, just a basket at the general store. Willa paused, then smiled. "Tell her I'll think on it." But that night she baked 3 loaves, one for supper, one for the boy's family, and one to leave on the porch, a tradition now for the wind, or a stranger, or just hope itself. Jonas fixed the bell on the front gate, cleaned it until it sang. And Willa, every time she passed under the horseshoe above the kitchen door, touched it lightly. Not for luck, for memory. When summer crept in and the nights held their heat, they slept with windows open, the scent of bread and lavender floating into the dark. One night, long after even the coyotes had quieted, Jonas stirred. "You awake?" he whispered. "I am now," she replied, amused. He turned toward her, unsure. "You ever think about what it means to stay?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Most folks think staying means you've given up, settled. But I think staying is choosing. Choosing where you'll grow old, choosing who you'll share your morning coffee with." He reached out, took her hand. Not urgently, just enough. "Then I'm glad you stayed," he said. She squeezed back. "Me too." The fire in the kitchen never really went out after that. Even when it cooled, even when the coals dimmed, something in that room stayed lit inside the walls, inside them. It was in the way Willa folded napkins, in the way Jonas sliced bread, in the way their eyes met over steaming mugs and unfinished conversations. Years would pass. Children would grow. The fence would need mending again, but the kitchen would still be warm, still waiting. Because some love doesn't need declarations, just firelight and flower, and the courage to stay. In the quiet stretch of Canyon Ridge, what began as a single knock on a stranger's door unfolded into a story far richer than most would expect. Willa Hart, a girl with nothing but a cast-iron pot and a voice barely louder than the wind, came looking not for charity but for purpose. And Jonas Calloway, a man worn by loss and years of silence, found himself answering not just the door but the call of hope. Willa's journey was not marked by glory, nor was it built on grand ambition. She had no riches to claim, no letters of introduction, no family name to open doors. What she carried instead were memories of warmth, the language of a kitchen, and a heart that refused to surrender. The simple offer, "I can cook," was not just a skill. It was a plea for dignity, a chance to contribute a bridge between two lives stalled by grief. Jonas, like many who lived too long with heartache, had sealed his world shut. He had patched his barn, fed his chickens, and sanded his grief down to manageable edges. But he had not healed. Not until a young woman, quiet and stubborn, stepped across his porch with dust on her boots and a past she didn't speak of. In Willa, Jonas saw not just resilience but the echo of his own buried longing. Her presence stirred something he had forgotten, that some silences do not protect. They only prolong the pain. Together, they built not a love born of declarations but of daily choices. Willa didn't demand space. She earned it by sweeping out years of neglect, coaxing bread from cold ovens, teaching children the art of dough. Jonas didn't offer roses. He offered kindling, a patched apron, and a hand-carved rolling pin. They built a life not with vows, but with gestures, quiet, repetitive, real. The moments that shaped them were rarely loud. A look exchanged over time-scented eggs. A laugh shared at a pie too burnt to save. A horseshoe nailed above a door, not for luck, but as a signal that someone mattered here. And in those acts, the ranch became more than a place. It became home. There were temptations to leave. Offers of storefronts, names on signs, bustling streets filled with admiration. But Willa, who had spent too much time running from danger, from judgment, from loneliness, chose to stop. She chose to stay, not because it was easier, but because staying meant building, repairing, rooting. She did not chase a name above a door. She became the name whispered in the scent of cornbread, in the laughter of children, in the way the kitchen glowed at dusk. And Jonas. He learned that opening a door once more was not a risk of loss, but a chance at resurrection. That protecting someone didn't require armor, just presence. A chair pulled out, a ring passed forward. The belief that love, when earned slowly and held gently, could restore not just a home, but a soul. As years passed, their story did not fade. It deepened. The bread Willa baked continued to rise. Jonas's tools aged but remained useful. Children grew. The gate creaked, but the kitchen, the heart of their life, stayed warm, because the fire never truly went out. It lived in the flour-covered hands, in the steam over coffee, in the memory of one quiet girl who knocked and the quiet man who let her in. So what can we learn from Willa and Jonas? That love is not just found in flowers and poems, it is in actions. In the mundane, the everyday, the ordinary done with care. That safety is not given, it is created brick by careful brick, loaf by steady loaf. That healing does not happen alone, but in tandem with trust, patience, and shared purpose. Most importantly, we learn that staying when done by choice and with intention is a form of bravery. In a world that often glorifies running, chasing, and leaving, there is something revolutionary about planting your roots, about saying, "This is enough. This is mine. I will tend to it." In our modern lives, these lessons ring louder than ever. We are encouraged to move fast, to want more, to seek elsewhere. But perhaps the quiet power of this story lies in its gentle refusal, the refusal to give up on a place, on a person, on the promise of a warm kitchen and a hand-carved scoop. If you find yourself weary, uncertain, or wondering where your place in the world might be, remember Willa. Remember Jonas. Remember that sometimes all it takes is a knock, a bowl of stew, a loaf left on a porch, and a little fire you refuse to let go out. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of something you'd forgotten, or someone you've been missing, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to our channel for more timeless stories of love, resilience, and quiet bravery. Your support helps us keep telling the tales that matter, stories not just of happy endings but of honest beginnings. Because out here, even the loneliest hearts can find their way home. Thank you for listening. And remember, some promises don't need words. Just warmth, just bread, just the courage to stay.